Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the Digital Skincare Summit. My name is Michael Nordstrand, and I'm going to be speaking a little bit about fragrance in skincare. I'm frequently asked by clients, by consumers, and the larger sort of global considerations around the purpose in skincare. What purpose or purposes does it serve? So this is something that currently, with certain legislation in the European Union and other areas of the world, that the industry in a broader sense has been tasked with defining the role and the benefits of having fragrance in skincare. The first and largest sort of consideration here is the consumer experience. Some of our primary considerations and reasons that we include fragrance in skincare are these three components. The biggest, perhaps, is the sensory benefit. Fragrance can impart pleasant scents, memorable scents. These can improve satisfaction with skincare products and also increase the likelihood of continued use. I'm sure many of the people speaking today will tell you that the key to a good skincare regimen is regularity, using products, on a daily basis. There's also the added component to the sensory benefit that helps the consumer feel hygienic. They've managed, their hygiene routine, and this seamlessly sort of fits into that. And that can also be related to products that combat malodor. Of course, adding fragrance to skincare is not the only way to combat malodor. There are actives and things in things like deodorant and other products that manage this without fragrance. But fragrance is something that does contribute to the user experience of, I have finished my routine, I feel clean and hygienic and ready for the day. So malodor defense is something that for many types of skincare products, it's also extremely important, and fragrance can aid with this. The last category, a category that's only growing, is the consumer demand since the height of the pandemic for skincare to perform more than one function. So the interest of simplifying a routine and having products that can do more than one thing. These have been primary considerations in driving new product development. So fragrance ingredients are able to offer other potential benefits that we'll have a look at in just a second. One of those is the skin microbiome. So there are a number of studies that exist speaking about ingredients that are typically used for fragrance to make the matrix of a product smell better or to smell good or to have a signature odor. But there are numerous materials, naturally derived and synthetic, that have benefits, proven benefits from clinical studies that show their efficacy in balancing microbial growth, balancing the skincare microbiome itself. I personally don't have any claim or investment in whether or not fragrance ingredients positively impact the skin microbiome, but it is something that has been extensively researched. And there is, again, a growing interest in the market for fragrance ingredients to do double duty. So there's, sort of a big movement toward the wellness category overlapping with the fragrance category. And that also directly relates to mood modulation. So numerous studies indicate that both natural complex substances and their volatile organic compounds, as well as many of the synthetic analog molecules to naturally occurring ones, can have benefits on mood. They can reduce stress. They can aid in depression. So there are numerous studies that exist speaking about the positive impact on mood that fragrance ingredients can have. And again, this sort of sector of the industry is only growing. It is a big push behind the scenes at the big fragrance houses to investigate and then promote ingredients that are either captive to the company or a specialty that they produce, pushing toward saying not only does this smell good or work in formulation, but it also will aid in mood modulation for the consumer. So there's a lot of connection with things like aromatherapy that have become more mainstream the more the research has kind of accomplished. There are also a lot of concerns in skincare, from consumer concerns to environmental concerns, and I'd like to cover a few topics that touch on that. One is the environment, and I've chosen to begin with the environment because unfortunately it does not generally find itself in position number one with regard to driving the way we formulate, the way that we think about skincare. I will touch on user concerns as well, but the environment is a big component. We only have one Earth. There's not sort of a plan B at this point. So caring for the earth where we all have to live, and where many of the products that we use come from, environments that are under siege in a way from industry and things like that. So when we're talking about environmental impact, it's like Kermit the Frog said, it ain't easy being green. And too often we have a lot of greenwashing in the industry. We have nebulous terms that might be unsubstantiated to some degree or, completely unsubstantiated. And there may be a big sort of part of a brand's ethos that relies on some of these tenets, and yet I think that there's a lack of communication and understanding of what exactly these brands, these companies are doing to meet what these claims actually put forward. A great example is sustainability, which has been a big buzzword, connecting to consumers who think that by making a choice to be green or sustainable or clean, that they are also being environmentally conscious. Jen actually mentioned herself in an Instagram post that creating a product itself at all is not a sustainable thing, but there are things that can be done to help make it more sustainability focused. And I think that that is a really good way of putting it. Just talking about the impact of things like the beauty and skincare industries and the fragrance industry itself. Climate crisis is really concerned with how much waste is produced annually by an industry, in the form of, carbon emissions, in the form of plastic generation. So I think being mindful of that is something that is should be a concern for all brands, making sure that they are speaking with the consumer and helping them understand where the packaging for their product should end up. And there are certain brands that promote this by saying, if you recycle your product with us, maybe there's a rebate or something that you can do to get more product in the future. But I think in the fragrance industry itself, there's a big push to be carbon neutral, to offset carbon emissions. I think that this comes from a place of attempting to self-police before there's an issue with legislation, especially with the EU Green Deal. There's a movement to be completely green in Europe by 2030. It's a laudable goal, but there's a lot of sort of stepping stones to get to that end point. So I think things are moving in the right direction, but I think we could always do better. And I think sometimes we see the focus on certain components of the industry and other ones are sort of left, you know, to idle and wait for us to come back to. And the packaging waste is a huge environmental concern at the moment. I also think fact checking is just super important. When we think about the impact that fine fragrance has and fragrance and skincare has on the environment, it's quite minimal compared with the impact of laundry and household cleaning products. These are much bigger polluters. There's a lot more of a percentage of fragrance normally in these products, and they also frequently end up going down the drain in some way. So it's not to say that we shouldn't care about what skincare and fine fragrance are doing. We absolutely should. But I do think that paying more attention to the laundry care and household cleaning product industries that are bigger polluters is a good way for the industry to sort of manage more and sooner. I think also dispelling myths is a big deal. Education is super important, and we don't do enough, you know, despite our best efforts. A lot of things are confusing for the consumer. One of these big myths for me is that fragrance-free products are better for sensitive skin. This is not necessarily true. There are many active products that are used in skincare that can sensitize skin, not just fragrance materials. And that's not to say that there aren't adverse reactions, there aren't allergies to certain components of fragrance. That's very true. In about 1 to 4% of the population, there is sensitivity to things like this. But speaking about fragrance-free being somehow universally better for sensitive skin is a little bit of a misnomer. And the same for natural fragrances being safer. Um, Plants use volatile organic compounds as signaling systems. They use them internally and externally for communication and to metabolize uh, different components of nutrients that they need. So it's great that we have all these amazing materials, many of which come from plants. However, plants use some of these signaling molecules for defense as well. So there can be toxic components in plants. There can be, again, adverse reactions to the allergens that occur naturally in the plants. So somebody who's going to have an allergic reaction, they have an equal, if not higher chance of reacting to a complex natural substance than they do to a synthetic. So I think it's interesting to note that naturality is not necessarily indicative of safety. So understanding that and helping consumers to understand that for me is a paramount bit of education. The same with naturality and sustainability. The footprint, the carbon footprint, the land footprint, the value chain uh, for growing, harvesting, and extracting natural materials and shipping them around the world. Definitely, there are sort of steps that have been taken to make these processes better and more eco-friendly. But in many, many instances, the monocultures that are created and the amount of space on the land that these things take to produce can be better solved in certain upgrades that we've had, innovations we've had in the industry, like white biotechnology, whereby a natural molecule can be created through fermentation or enzymatic production, which has a very, very low waste and a very, very low, if not negative, carbon emission. So I think it's interesting to note the consumer tends to think of natural as being sustainable. In a lot of places, they feel that there's an overlap, and there can be, but it's definitely not the beginning and the end of that story. Lastly, fragrance-free doesn't mean that a product has no scent. So for me, this is a mislabeling. This is the sort of miscommunication on the part of a lot of brands. The matrices in skincare can be quite strong smelling. They can also be mild smelling, but most of them have some sort of odor, even the mildest ones. So, you know, selling fragranced product versus selling unfragranced product, there's definitely a distinction, but it might be more accurate to describe these as no fragrance added rather than fragrance free. And in a lot of cases, I notice in these fragrance free brands, some UV stabilizers and other components like phenoxyethanol I have here as an example, which inhibits microbial activity and acts as a preservative, also smells of rose. So they're not adding these ingredients as fragrant components. They're using them for other things, but they still have a smell. And that does impact the final sort of consumer experience. So what can we do? There's a lot of fear-based narratives that are generated in the market, and this is a formula that works, and there's a reason that people continue to revisit it. Many, many brands have now a very long list of things that they don't do or don't add. And this does tend to work. It plays on consumer anxiety around safety and skincare. But I think that fashioning new narratives is a way that we can move away from this type of marketing. And there are a number of brands that focus more on what they are doing and what their products can do rather than what they don't do. They may also mention that, but there seems to be a better balance. So I think that's a really interesting way of approaching how we change the conversation of what fragrance and skincare can actually mean. Being selective when we buy products ourselves as consumers, when we as formulators work with certain raw materials, we're basically voting to keep those products or those materials in circulation. So sometimes there may be a better analog to something that we could choose as formulators to preserve things a little bit better or to be mindful of the impact on the environment. And the same is true for certain products. We are essentially saying, I like this product and I want to continue to buy it. But if it is problematic in some way, not buying the product is kind of one of the more organic ways that we can impact whether or not that product is going to be widely available, widely produced. Asking questions, this seems very obvious, but sometimes consumers don't know where to begin. I think investigating claims that brands make and being curious, giving them the opportunity to speak on what their claims are, is a really great way to get a better understanding of what it is the brand intends to do and intends to say. And that also helps to create trust. So the relationship with the consumer and the brand is largely built on trust. And I think certain brands that communicate about transparency of their ingredients, formulation techniques and styles, this can engender a lot of trust with the consumer. But I do think that, again, we have a lot of missed opportunities in education, where we can educate the consumer, boil things that might be very complicated boil them down into simpler ways of communicating and help the consumer trust that they are making a good choice and help them understand how it's a good choice so that they can move forward and make the same consideration for new product. And speaking of the consumer and the safety, this is something that is also very opaque. It's hard for the consumer to sort of understand. Many of you will have heard of IFRA and RIFM. They are an internal, sort of industry self-policing body and research body. And there's definitely a lot of monitoring of ingredients, very, very stringent practices for how we can, as an industry, protect the consumer and protect the industry that we work in. And that helps with generating labeling rules. Many government bodies also will do stakeholder collaboration where they speak with industry professionals, they speak with consumers about their concerns. And this is not perfect everywhere in the world. Some legislative bodies go a little bit too far maybe, and others don't go far enough. So working on a global harmonization of what regulating skincare, regulating fragrance looks like is something that there's an attempt to move toward. The Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act in the United States does sort of seem like a step in the right direction. I think we're still a little bit behind, but I think that it's a move in the correct direction rather than a step backwards. Lastly, I just want to touch on some market considerations, where some of these things come from that are big deals in skincare at the moment and fragrance at the moment. So I've used an inverted pyramid because I feel that some of the biggest components are more towards the top here. And I left the bottom piece of the pyramid off because I'm not sure exactly what the next big thing will be, but this kind of gives a little bit of an overview of what's in the global consumer mindset right now. So this preference for natural and organic skincare products, it's only rising. It's turned into a cornerstone of a large part of my industry and also the skincare industry. So it is not going away. But I do think there's an opportunity to sort of change the conversation, tell some new narratives around what this actually means and in what cases it can be good and in what cases it's not as useful. Also, point two, increasing e-commerce sales for skincare, largely fueled by social media. And ever since the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, there has been a big push for many brands to make their products very quickly and easily available through social media purchasing. And I actually purchased a few products via Instagram in preparation for doing this talk, just to see, what the process was like and how easy it might be. It's very, very simple to get done. So there is a surge in sales through e-commerce points of sale that are directly connected with social media. There's also, again, as we talked about, a growing demand for multifunctional skincare products. So the simplification of the routine, getting back to a place where the consumer can, rely on their products to do more than one thing, is something that is really driving product development at the moment, especially behind the scenes. Number four, for good or ill, influencers drive skincare purchasing decisions. If you've spent 10 or 15 minutes on Instagram, I'm sure you've encountered plenty of interesting things, but also a lot of misinformation. So I think, again, reaching out across the line to an influencer, to the general consumer, and helping them understand some basic tenets of what it is that we do in formulation, both for fragrance and for skincare, could go a long way, because they have a broad reach, they have a big audience, and just a few easy, simple bullet points would erase or, ameliorate a lot of the issues that I see happening. Last, clean beauty products are maintaining a substantial foothold. So the fear-based marketing is continuing. It's beginning to turn into its own sector of the industry that is here to stay, I believe, for quite a while. But I think, again, asking brands to be responsible for what they're claiming and, bringing these things up and allowing them to speak on it can educate the consumer a lot better. And I think that that is something that we as professionals can bring to the table, interacting with different stakeholders in marketing, in other industries, where we can help people to understand what clean actually means and what it requires, and if that's even the best word. So thank you so much for tuning in. I think I'm slightly over time, but I'm looking forward to the question and answer period after this. In the meantime, stay in touch. My LinkedIn and my Instagram profile are both here. I'd love to hear from you. I'm also including a 16-page research document with some bite-sized information and a lot of references that will get you started if this is a topic that particularly interests you. Thank you so much, and please enjoy the rest of the summit.